So what's up, guys? We're going to be going into this mini-series that people have been long awaited for about the Champions of Christ. I mentioned this a while ago. A lot of you guys have been asking about it ever since. And there were 4 champions of Christ, they called them, or the Pope called them that name, gave them that title for their efforts against the Ottoman Empire in the mid to late 1400s and early 1500s, I think, was Stephen the Great a little bit. Well, it was a big coalition at the time. They were fighting against the Ottoman Empire, who were essentially the strongest empire in the world at that day. They were right before their peak, I believe, the Ottomans. I think their peak was the mid 1500s, early mid 1500s, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, late 1400s up to the 1500s.
Yeah, so it was getting really close. And the 4 champions of Christ at the time. So here's who these guys are, and you're gonna have to remember them for the next 4 episodes. You got Dracula from Albania, who, in my opinion, and many historians account, the most powerful of the 4. He went undefeated against the Ottoman Empire. Then you have Hunyadi, who is from Hungary. Hunyadi led a crusade against the Ottoman Empire and probably was, one of the best leaders to go up against them. He put a lot of effort against the Ottomans. Then you had Stephen the Great. I think Stephen the Great was the second strongest of the 4. He's very much underrated as a military leader. He won 46 out of 48 battles against the Ottomans, or something crazy of that magnitude. He helped Vlad the Impaler. So Stephen the Great's from Moldavia, right? I would say Hunyadi is probably the 3rd or 2nd strongest of the 4. Then we have Vlad the Impaler, who we're going to be talking about for this episode. Vlad the Impaler was a little bit different. I would say the reason why he's 4th on the list for me, or the weakest of the 4, is because he didn't implement as many tactics for battles or strategies. He didn't look at the war this way, right? The other 3 looked at this war against the Ottomans in a military sense. They were very crafty in that way, whereas Vlad was seeking a whole different reason in this whole war. Would you say it was a war of revenge for him, in a sense, or just pure violence, hatred for the Ottomans and anybody who opposed him?
Yeah, I would say, because he never really strongly allied with any sort of religious or any kind of philosophical belief. He kind of just he was punished a lot as a kid in the Ottoman court. So yeah. And that's well documented too. So for him, you can imagine that I truly believe it was all about revenge for him.
Yeah, and especially with what he did. I mean, everybody knows about his nickname, right? The Impaler, and he got that nickname for a very gruesome and real reason.
And out of all the 4 champions of Christ that they were crowned as, he was the only one that did that.
Yep, the only one. So the 3, Dracula, Hunyadi, Stephen the Great, they were fighting for kind of the same cause. They were fighting for Christian faith first, right? The Christian religion. Then they were fighting for their own homes, to defend their homes, and all of Europe, pretty much. The Ottoman Empire was seeking to invade the rest of Europe, and I think they were more focused on getting to the Pope and the Vatican. And once they took that down, the Christian religion would pretty much collapse, or crumble at least.
Yeah, that was usually the goal for all the Islamic empires, all the way up until the Ottoman Empire, was to invade Rome and take it over.
Yeah, because soon after, into Vlad's life, they invaded Constantinople, right? Sure. And they took over Constantinople, which is a huge deal, right? So those 3 champions of Christ, they were fighting for kind of the same reasons. They were helping each other as well. More so Dracula and Hunyadi. Stephen the Great was helping a bit with Vlad the Impaler, but Vlad, he was, again, a whole different reason, man, with his methods, with how he would not only go up against the Ottomans, but the people in his own country as well. He would impale and execute, torture, even the people in his own country that opposed his political power. If he was suspicious of anybody to be an enemy, Turkish or not, he would go against them, but he really had something against the Turks. I would say it's because when he was captured as a kid, what he experienced in the Ottoman regime, under their education system and everything, it created a psychopath in a sense.
Yeah, and then that's the thing. When you look at Vlad, his whole persona, it's very different than the other 3. It's almost psychotic, like you said, very almost psychopathic, because his punishments are very extreme. And then again, he does that for another reason too. It's also a strategy. When your enemy sees 10 to 20,000 impaled bodies on sticks rotting, that's psychological warfare.
Yeah, the most infamous scene about Vlad's history, when the Conqueror, Mehmed the Conqueror, the leader of the Ottoman Empire, he walked into what he said was a forest of bodies on stakes, over 20,000 people. We'll get into that later. And here's the thing about Vlad the Impaler's entire history. It's not that much about battles. When you read about it, it sounds like a story. And I'm not talking about the Dracula story, right? Not as much documented battles as there was what he would do to his enemies after he defeated them and stuff like that. And there is specifically one battle that was well documented, and that was called the Night Attack of Targovishte, right? Where he was actually intelligent in some ways, but also bitten back in other ways, where we used the scorched earth tactic. We'll get to that as well later, but the thing that we have to talk about Vlad the Impaler, he killed, they say, responsible for 80,000 deaths during his bloody reign, and he was one of the leaders of the Order of the Dragon. The Order of the Dragon was a giant coalition of neighboring countries to defend the Holy Roman Empire and defend the Holy See, the Pope, the Vatican City, all of that stuff against the Ottoman Empire. And the countries that were together in this coalition were Hungary, Croatia, the Holy Roman Empire, of course, Wallachia, which would be today's Romania, that's where Vlad's from, Moldavia, the Crown of Aragon, Serbia, Albania, and Bulgaria, right? Those are the countries that are together. What's the crown? Do you know the Crown of Aragon?
Aragon was in France, if I'm not wrong. If I'm not mistaken, it was in France.
Yeah, that was only when I was kind of like, need to do more research on. And for those who don't know what the Holy See is pretty much like the government of the Roman Catholic Church, led by the Pope, right? So this is one of the targets of the Ottoman Empire. And, they were targeting the Vatican, of course. Their leader was at first Murad II. During this time, Murad II died from a battle against Jeshkashrioti from Albania, and he was replaced later by the fiercer and young Mehmed II, right? So Jeshkashrioti actually became, I think, the only one that killed a sultan out of these four, responsible for one of the deaths of the sultan. Another reason as to why he was regarded as the best of the four, right? Enemies and allies alike. Gave him that sort of respect. And Mehmed II, in my opinion, one of the greatest military leaders of the Ottoman Empire's history. I mean, he took over, the first to take over Constantinople, if I'm not wrong.
Yep.
And he was young, too. He was like in his early 20s at the time.
Yeah, in 1453, yep.
Crazy, right? And they say that he grew up with Vlad and his brother Radu, or not grew up with them, but he knew of them while they were inside the Ottoman Empire captured.
And that's the interesting thing. You see, Mehmed the Conqueror, as they called him.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about him is to so many people from many different parts, including Attila the Hun, have tried to attack Constantinople. So many have failed. The city was basically impenetrable, probably even more impenetrable than Rome was.
Yeah.
So for the fact that Mehmed was able to pull this off at such a young age, it tells you that this is a very accomplished man.
Yeah, they even made a movie, I think, after him, describing a lot of this stuff. And, very, very interesting figure in history, what he was able to do in such little time. So during this whole war, right?
Yeah.
When you see these countries, it seems like they're all Eastern Europeans, right?
Yeah, mostly located in the Balkans, yeah.
The western side of Europe. Western Europe had their own issues going on. They didn't really help too much, right, against this invasion on the rest of Europe, because they were kind of fighting each other at the time, or fighting themselves. For an example, France and England, which were very powerful at the time, especially France, right? They were in their 100 Years' War with each other at the time. And even when it ended, they couldn't go into another war with the Ottomans after that, right? It'd be difficult to go from one giant war into another, right? It'd be like horrible for their economy, and the soldiers wouldn't be able to keep up with that. So a lot of the efforts were the Eastern Europeans going up against the Ottomans.
And just as a fun fact,
yeah,
during this 100 Years' War is where the famous Joan of Arc makes her appearance.
Oh, yes, you're right.
The Battle of Orleans.
Battle of Orleans. That's interesting. And that's what this whole thing was really about. It was, they fought tooth and nail, especially the champions of Christ, tactical and daunting battles against such a powerful empire at the time. And it all starts when he was captured with his father and his brother. This is what Vlad's whole history begins, and pretty much shapes him to become the man who he later becomes. His father, him, and his brother Radu, who's kind of important later, they get captured by the Ottoman Empire. His father negotiates with the Ottomans. He's like, okay, let me go, right? Let all of us go. But then the Ottomans are like, okay, we'll let you go by yourself, but your sons have to stay with us, right? They're young. And this is a common thing that the Ottomans usually would do. So not only are you going to do that, you're going to bring 500 more boys to us for us to educate and bring up in the empire. And also you're going to pay homage every single year to the Ottoman. His father agreed. He left his sons there. He went back home. And again, very common method from the Ottoman Empire to grab like boys of different countries that they were going to conquer, and then later send them back to rule over those countries.
And just so everybody knows, what the Ottomans used to do during the 15th century, during their invasion of the Balkans, since they already conquered by the mid 15th century most of the Balkans, they had a few areas: Albania, Serbia, Hungary, obviously. But what they would do was they would bring in these young boys, and they would convert them from Christianity to Islam, and then what they would do is they would train them to become janissaries. A janissary literally translates to as new soldier. So these foreign soldiers would become the new soldier, as they were, obviously, as the word janissary translates to. And that was the whole idea, was to convert them, incorporate them into the Ottoman Empire, and have them fight for them.
Yes. And sometimes they would send them back to rule over countries.
Yes.
Of their home countries. And I think the reason why they would do that is because those countries, it would be much easier for them to follow someone of their own kind.
Yeah, someone that they can connect with.
Yeah, so this is actually their plan with Vlad the Impaler. They were going to raise him to become a soldier, or even Radu, his brother, send him back to Wallachia to rule over under the Ottoman Empire. Right?
It's important to understand this too, and it's actually good that you mentioned that, because what you're seeing here now is, when you look at that, for example, like you just said, the people that they had brought, the boys that they had brought over to the Ottoman Empire to convert them and raise them as soldiers, they would send them back to their home countries.
Yeah.
The whole idea behind that, and remember now, war is just as much, if not more, political than it is militarily.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is they're waging war in a political way, basically saying, look, we're going to have your own people rule over you under our banner.
Yeah, exactly.
So it doesn't seem like you have an overlord above you.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, it's just one of our own. He's just taking charge, not a big deal.
Yeah, just another flag on our country. Same guy, though.
Again, it goes back to what Karl von Clausewitz said. War is a continuation of politics by other means. Mm-hmm. It's the same. It's political just as much as it is military.
Yeah, and while they're raised up like Vlad and Radu, they'll be taught in their education system, taught about philosophy, how to speak Turkish, convert to Islam, all that stuff. This actually comes later to bite back against the Ottoman Empire when Vlad betrays them. Because here's the thing: when you have these soldiers, these young kids grown as soldiers in their army, and if they betray you, they know your secrets. They know how you do battles. They know how to use weapons. They know kind of your brain, the Ottoman brain, how it works in this whole conflict. And this not only happens with Vlad the Impaler, who uses it against the Ottomans. It happens with, Jesh Kastrioti was also taken by the Ottomans and used all of this against them as well. Yeah. So Vlad and Radu were, in the Ottoman Empire. Their dad goes home. And they say that Vlad also, again, grew up a bit with Mehmed II, who will later become the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. And things get a little bit rocky back in Wallachia with his father and his oldest brother. So initially, right, does he go with Can Hunyadi? Because Can Hunyadi at the time was like the big leader against the Ottoman Empire. He's the guy that's trying to lead this all, putting the most effort. I believe his father joins him first.
Joined Can Hunyadi?
Yeah, Can Hunyadi?
Yes, they do form an alliance in the beginning, yeah.
Okay.
Because they're one of they're part of that league.
Yeah, the Order of the Dragon. So Vlad's father goes to join Can Hunyadi, and he's paying homage to the Ottoman Empire still and doing all that stuff. But then later he wants to go back, right? He's scared about his children. He's scared that something's going to happen to them. He thinks there's no way they're going to win this war. So they're like, all right, I'm going to go back to the Ottoman Empire, and I have 11,000 Bulgarian refugees in my country of Wallachia. I'm going to send them back to the Ottomans. And Can Hunyadi's like, that is not happening on my watch. If you know anything about Can Hunyadi, we'll get to it in his episode. He did not deal well, or he did not feel very kindly about anybody who would betray him or their cause. This happened many times throughout his entire, history. He goes, I believe, and invades Wallachia, right?
Yep.
And he kills their father, right? He kills Vlad's father there. And he sends in this guy named Vladislav II as the new leader of Wallachia that's going to, in his hopes, not go with the Ottomans, stay with the cause for the Order of the Dragon.
And here's the interesting thing about this now. So when you go to appoint new people, you have to make sure, it doesn't matter what time period you're talking about, when you're appointing basically a new leader or a governor or whatever it may be, you have to understand exactly who it is that you're dealing with. And John, now that he appoints Vladislav II, you're going to find out in a little bit why he doesn't trust him very well. Yeah. So the thing about this is, again, like I said, war is just as much political as military. So there's a whole political side to this too. This is the strategy here now. He's got to constantly stay, basically, he's got to keep his ear to the streets at all times. Yeah. What's going on over here? What's being said over here? What kind of decisions are being made? Yeah,
because there's a lot of people talking even behind people's backs at the time, trying to get their own favors. And I believe at the time, Vlad's oldest brother actually dies.
Yes. Mircha.
Yes, and you were telling me they, like, in a gruesome manner, and this is a lot of Vlad's history. It's a lot of gruesome executions. I think you said something like they pour silver into his eyes or onto his eyes.
Yeah, they poured molten iron into his eyes.
Iron.
And, I mean, again, and after they did that, he didn't die initially from that. I mean, obviously, that brought him very close to death. But what happened was they buried him alive right after that.
That is gruesome.
The pain that he must have been going through is, that's absolutely gruesome.
Yeah, and it's important to know why his oldest brother died, because with his oldest brother gone, the new successor to the throne, or the heir to the throne of Wallachia, is Vlad the Impaler now, right? He's got, the oldest brother dead, his father's dead, he's there, his younger brother's Radu, he's the one that needs to take charge. And here's the thing that happens, with this entire turmoil in Wallachia now, illegitimate rulers start to rise up, called the pretenders. This is what they call them. They're pretending to be the heir to the throne. They're pretending to be the next leaders. And, these guys are all kind of fighting each other with, I believe even with Vladislav, and who's going to be, the next successor and all this stuff.
And just to bring a comparison so nobody misunderstands, the same thing that's happening here now with all these new wannabe rulers now that are coming up and trying to fight for the throne, it's the same thing like we mentioned in the last episode with Khalid.
Yes, with Khalid, yes.
The Rida Wars. After the death of Muhammad, you had all these false prophets that were trying to take power. It's the same exact
thing, just a whole different name. That's it. And Vlad and his brother flee from the Ottoman Empire at the time. The reason why they did this, the reason why they were capable of doing this, is actually the Ottomans let them go in respects of their father paying homage to them. So Vlad and Radu are allowed to leave back, right? And Radu at some point comes back to the Ottomans, but Vlad goes, I think with Janhanyadi later, right?
Yeah.
Or what happens first with Vlad?
So what happens with Vlad, as he's part of the Ottomans, what happens is now the Sultan, what he does is, now this is the strategy he does here now.
Yeah.
There's a big fight that's going to happen in Belgrade. Now, there's a big battle in Belgrade that's going to happen. So what he does is, obviously, John Hunyadi and Vladislav II are tied together through the League. Mm-hmm. So they both have to go cooperate together in this battle. They both have to be there.
Yeah.
So what he tells Vlad, he says he does a two-pronged attack. He literally does a two-pronged, one political and one military. Mm-hmm. He says, okay, Vlad, I'm going to give you Vlad Dracula. He tells him, Vlad the Impaler. He goes, I'm going to send you to Wallachia right after I attack Belgrade. Because what that's going to do is that's going to draw Vladislav from the Wallachian throne. Yeah. He's not going to be there. So once he's gone, I want you to take power.
Yeah, because Vladislav is joining kind of with the Ottomans at the time, right?
Yeah, and he tells Vlad, don't attack. Do not use any military force. Get in there diplomatically, take the throne. So as he goes to Belgrade, he gives Vlad the Impaler the signal, go. Mm-hmm. Obviously, this doesn't work out for Vlad because the Turks lose this battle, even though they had a huge advantage at the Battle of Belgrade.
Yeah,
the Turks lost that battle. So what happens is, as Vladislav's returning back home, he finds out about this, and Vlad is unsuccessful. So Vlad has to flee from there.
Yes, and so Vlad later joins Hunyadi's cause, and he actually has a lot of respect for Hunyadi, one of the only leaders at the time he respected.
And he was scared to go back to the Turks because of his failure to take the throne, and he was afraid that they were going to punish him.
Yeah, they were going to do something to him, and a little bit later, Vladislav, the guy that John Hunyadi put into power, he dies in battle to take back Wallachia, with all these pretenders, and, the Ottomans are still there and stuff like that. And Vlad soon becomes the new leader, one of the new leaders, and he began his reign of terror. When he gets power, he lets everybody know what what it's really all about, what his whole cause actually is. He immediately starts purging the people he suspected to be in part of killing his father, right? So revenge right away for his father. And they say that only 2 princes of many, there's many princes in Wallachia, only 2 of them of many on the list survived his 4-year reign because he suspected so many of them of taking part in killing his father. And soon after this, the champion of Christ, John Hunyadi, dies of a plague after a successful win against the Ottoman Empire, right? And a fight for power, just like always, whenever a country loses their leader, a fight for power happens in Hungary, and it's also happened in Moldavia. Now, that's going to be very important because Vlad helps the other soon-to-be-called champion of Christ, Stephen the Great, take the throne of Moldavia, who I believe is also his cousin, if I'm not wrong. So, he's helping Stephen the Great take back his throne. They're going to be helping each other. Stephen comes back to help Vlad. Vlad comes back to help Stephen. They do this whole thing. They had a rocky relationship at one point where there were tensions between them two, but usually they, dealt pretty well with each other.
The smartest move that Vlad the Impaler made in his whole entire life was building a good, solid relationship with Stephen the Great.
Yes.
That's single-handedly
very important.
Single-handedly the best decision he made in his whole life.
And he kept it as pretty much the whole way through. And he rerouted back to Transylvania and started impaling men, women, and children from a Saxon village and anyone who he was suspicious of being an enemy. He really did not like the Saxons, and the Saxons really did not like him either. They wrote a lot of bad stuff about him, in the press, basically. But later he was able to make peace with the Saxons, who later, backstabbed him by confiscating his materials, his steel, without paying them. So he would make an example out of the Saxons by ransacking them, torturing their merchants, and they said in a letter that he impaled and burned alive 41 merchants and 300 of their children. Just to set an example of what you do if you backstab Vlad the Impaler.
And the very gruesome part about his impalement was obviously they would sharpen the stakes.
Yes.
And what they would do is they would put animal fat, lard, on top of the stakes, so they would slide all the way down. I mean, there was no basically lubing up the stake.
Yeah.
That would kill him, and
it wasn't a quick death either. They said that some of these people would die after a day.
Yeah, it was pure agony. Yeah.
Imagine being on a stake for a day.
You know what the scariest part about this whole situation here in the Balkans is there's no trust.
Oh no.
With anybody. When you look at all these different leaders and all the situations that are going on, you're like, okay, there's no trust amongst anybody. Even Skanderbeg was constantly fighting against his relatives in his own country people because there were those who fought against him within his own country.
Yep, exactly.
So it's this trust issue that you've got going on.
Yeah, and the impaling part, I mean, soon Mehmed II, who becomes the Sultan, he's going to be looking at how gruesome it actually is. And there were stories, right? People were starting to write stories about Vlad at the time, writing like different kind of their own kind of books as to him feasting while watching people impaled and stuff like that. Like he would enjoy watching people getting tortured. I don't know how true it would be, but those are the stories that were being written at the time.
Now, as a fun fact, there's many of those stories have gone around that he used to dip his bread in the blood of his enemies, or of those that he killed. That actually all started from the Saxons.
Mm-hmm.
The Saxons hated him so much that they spread those rumors all the way out to the Catholic Church in Rome, and all the way out to the Holy Roman Empire. And then those rumors just became widespread, and they were like, "Whoa, this guy's a maniac.
He's actually a monster, right?" And
not that there was actually no concrete proof.
There was no proof of this. Yeah, it was just people were writing this about, and you'll see later there's many letters that the Saxons would write about Vlad to the Pope, and the Pope would believe it to just imprison him or do something to him, punish him in some sort of way, which was false, false accusations. But then at the time, after he impaled those merchants, Vlad gets into a bit of a turmoil or conflict with this guy named Dan III, who's one of the pretender kings of Wallachia. He's not a real king, but he does have followers. And Dan III is angry about Vlad, what he's doing in this country. So he goes and attacks him. Huge mistake, by the way. Horrible mistake. He was not equipped to fight Vlad the Impaler.
No,
Vlad,
not at all.
Yeah, Vlad easily defeats Dan III and executes him. And the way he does it is he forces Dan to dig his own grave before he decapitates him, putting him in there and digging it up, or making it pretty much his burial site.
Right.
And what he also did was impaled all of Dan's supporters. Any person that supported Dan, he made sure to get rid of them in the most gruesome way possible.
You know what the crazy thing is when he takes the Wallachian throne, he's just, the way he eliminates all his political enemies, it's in the most extreme way.
Yeah, it's not like quick death. Like, I'm just going to get rid of you. I'm going to let everybody know how I killed you, and everybody's going to see it too.
Like, for example, if you look in China, in ancient China, many times they poisoned their political enemies to get rid of them, and they would just put the whole story to sleep after that. Vlad is just impaling people, he's chopping heads off, he's
burning them alive,
gouging eyes out,
burying them alive too.
Yeah, it's just absolute agony.
And it's not just the Saxons, it's not just the Ottoman soldiers, it's not just Dan's supporters, the pretender, even envoys, even political officials, government officials from, even enemy territory, they would come to spread a message or give him, some kind of, agreement or negotiate with them or something like that. He would impale them as well. He wouldn't want to hear any of them out. Vlad would impale the envoys from the other kings and leaders of Wallachia and pillage their villages as well, right? Just a reign of terror completely. But he was able to reach peace negotiations with the other rulers, but still went with, vengeful intent on anybody who supported Dan III. Even while having this agreement with the other leaders, he made sure anybody who supported that guy, I'm going to kill them, regardless of our peace treaty.
Yeah, because that could inspire a rebellion.
Yes, exactly. But Vlad was paying homage for a while to the Ottoman Empire. He was carrying that whole thing with his father, I believe, or at least initially. But he later stopped. For 3 years, he stopped paying homage to the Ottomans, and Mehmed II got upset about this. He planned to kill Vlad now. He needs to get rid of this guy, right? He sent another envoy, right, another messenger in a sense, a government official, and he had him guided, protected by one of his Albanian admirals named Hamza Bey. Right, Hamza Bey is a high-ranking official or high-ranking military officer in their army. But Vlad some way found out about this plan, right? Hamza Bey was going to come there to kill Vlad, or capture him at least. It's not well documented how Vlad knew about this, how he got this information. But here's the thing. So on their way there, Vlad actually ambushes them with handgunners, right? So he ambushes the envoy and Hamza Bey and his 1,000 men that he came there with, points handgunners at them and kills every single one of them besides Hamza Bey. So the admiral, he has him especially impaled on the largest stake he can give him. And the reason why he said he gave him the largest stake to put through his body is because it's respectful. I'll give him his respect by giving him the biggest stake.
And just so everybody understands, when he said handgunner, what that was back in the day, a handgun back then in the 1400s, was this about 3 foot long wooden shaft. Obviously, they had a barrel inside of it, and they had a wick on top of it, and then you had a lighter to light that wick, and it would shoot a lead ball out of it. And it was basically a very, very watered down small version of a cannon that you could hold in your hand.
Yeah, hand cannon. And I believe they used it back in China a long time ago too.
Yeah, the Chinese were the first to produce that.
Yeah, and then later, in medieval times, they changed it a bit to become more advanced, and it was very powerful at the time. He used that to kill Hamza Bey's men, impaled him on the biggest stake to show him respects. And Mehmed II learned about this and was furious. He started to learn how much of a monster Vlad was. And here's the thing, Vlad knows Mehmed, right? Vlad knows Mehmed from the time that they were raised with each other, or, when they were together in the Ottoman Empire. And Vlad went to attack first. He did not allow Mehmed to attack him. He attacked Mehmed first, and he used it deceitfully, or he did this in a deceitful manner. Oftentimes, Vlad would dress up, disguise himself as an Ottoman soldier. He did this many times.
He was known for doing this a lot.
Yes, a lot. And actually causes his demise. But what he did was, he went to an enemy garrison, one of the Ottoman garrisons, dressed as an Ottoman Turk or Ottoman soldier, and started speaking fluent Turkish to the commander of the garrison to open the gates, in which he does. He believes him. Oh, he's one of us.
And the interesting thing here, fun fact about Vlad, is he fluently spoke Latin, French, Turkish, and Wallachian.
That is
fluently.
That's actually impressive. So, once they open those gates, Vlad and his men storm in, takes the garrison, gets a big victory against the Ottomans. Or, they took a garrison, is a very important stronghold to have, especially in the enemy territory. And this is where I talked about before that the Ottomans, it bit themselves to teach this guy to speak Turkish and their politics and everything. He used it against them. They gave power and knowledge to a nightmare of an enemy.
You know what the interesting thing about this is, too, is the Ottomans, a lot of the rulers were known to be very historically knowledgeable.
Yeah.
But they literally made the same mistake that the Romans made when they had tried to acquire Germany. They trained the Germans on how to fight and I know everything about the Roman army, and the Germans turned it on them. And here you see the same thing happening with the Turks and Vlad.
Yep.
They empower Vlad, and then Vlad turns it on them.
Yep. And becomes even more powerful. Yeah, so it was a really big mistake for the Ottoman Empire. And at the time, Vlad, occupying something inside the Ottoman territory and happily rampages across villages and towns, starts pillaging, rampaging through, and he even writes a letter to the new ruler of Hungary because John Hunyadi died. He wrote to the ruler that he counted exactly 23,884 people he killed so far. He was counting the dead bodies of the people he killed.
Yeah, he had an exact count.
That is very sadistic. There's something very off about Vlad that he would even count the bodies of over 23,000 people.
It's crazy. Even modern soldiers used to say, more modern, maybe 19th century, used to say, whenever they would kill someone, they said, "Oh, we never counted."
Yeah,
because you're not supposed to count. And this guy, he's tallying it up.
He's happily counting. He's like, "Oh, how many guys did I kill today? Oh, okay, good. put that in the records.
Yeah.
And Mehmed learned about this. Mehmed was even more furious about it. And he's like, all right, enough. We got to get rid of Vlad. Vlad's too much. He's rampaging through our territory. He's killing and impaling people. He's an absolute monster. And Mehmed tells his men, gather 150,000 soldiers. We're going right after Vlad and taking Wallachia. Enough of this. So, not only to kill Vlad, but he wants to take the whole country back so nothing like this can happen again. And
yeah, he raises a huge army.
It's the second biggest army Mehmed has ever assembled after his takeover of Constantinople. And, Vlad gathered the largest army that he could put together that would even include women and children. He had women and children in his army that were above the age of 12 because Hungary was not helping them at the time. Janhanyadi was different than the new ruler, and new ruler doesn't want too much to do with Vlad the Impaler. So he was able to gather 30,000 people. I won't even say men, people in his army.
Yeah, the majority of them actually were made up of peasants. It was a peasant army for the most part.
30,000, and it's still greatly outnumbered with just numbers. And this led to the battle, the only real documented battle with details, called the Night Attack of Targoviste. Right? So Vlad and Mehmed meet each other. Mehmed's going in with his army. He wants to do this himself as well. Vlad avoided any pitched battle, right? He didn't want to go head to head with the Ottoman Empire. He was using feigned retreat tactics, like hit a little bit, run away, that whole thing. And he also famously used the scorched earth tactic. This is pretty much just focusing on destroying supplies and resources that the Ottoman Empire can use along the battle, right? This would be like they would poison the waters. They would scare away the animals into the mountains. They would create marshes. They would, what else? They would set traps and leaves over them to, trick the enemy.
Yeah, they would put those huge, they call them body traps, basically. Yeah. They were big. What it is they cover it with timber and leaves, so that way, a bunch of foliage, of course, and, a certain amount of men would fall inside.
Yep.
The whole thing behind this is like, why Vlad's doing this war? One, because he has no backup from any other country, essentially. Yep. Two, the Ottoman Empire just brought one of the biggest armies they've ever fielded in the history of their entire empire.
Oh, yeah.
Not only that, now, Vlad knows he doesn't have a real strategy or tactic to take them on head on. Not only that, when you're outnumbered that badly, you don't go head on with it. So Vlad's like, okay, I'm going to do exactly what the Russians did against Napoleon. I'm going to starve these guys out. And remember, this campaign is taking place in the middle of summer, in the peak of summer. So in the peak of summer, what are the potential threats? Bugs, insects. What do bugs and insects bring? Diseases. And this is where the Ottomans suffer from thirst, hunger, disease, and this is basically how the rest of the campaign goes for the Ottomans.
Yeah, and he's specifically targeting one person. He wants to kill Mehmed. So that's who he's focusing on, not necessarily how many soldiers can I kill, which is kind of uncharacteristic for Vlad, but he's showing a little bit more intelligence now instead of just gruesome brutality of how many can I rack up in body count. So he's trying to target Mehmed II. And what he would initially do at nighttime is invade their camps, right? He would hit and run attacks on their camps while they're sleeping, trying to see where Mehmed is, right? If he can kill Mehmed, he knows that the army will crumble. So that's essentially his target. And it wasn't really working. He was failing every time he would come in and out. He wasn't able to get to Mehmed. So he didn't really know exactly where he needed to be in order to attack Mehmed. So he tried another method. He had people who had the bubonic plague in his army, and he would send them out into the enemy camp to give them the plague, and he succeeded in doing so. There were a lot of Ottoman soldiers that died from the bubonic plague. Very gruesome method for him. And he would even target and destroy ports of Bulgaria. Just keep running away. He's constantly just on the retreat the entire time, looking for ways to disparage and discourage his enemies.
And the interesting thing about that is now when you're looking at what he's doing here with the whole disease and everything, another thing he did is he intentionally created marshes and swamps out of clean river systems. So these river systems that he had poisoned and that he had basically soiled and dirtied, they were originally clean. So by doing that, by dirtying it with poison and throwing a bunch of other garbage in there, what happens is you create a marsh. And as we've mentioned in the Hannibal episode, what happens is when the one area that an army never wants to march through are marshes and swamps. Just like again, I quote The Art of War again. Sun Tzu says, these are areas you want to avoid. And the Turks are intentionally crossing through these areas, which is enhancing the deadliness of the disease.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yep, that's a really good point.
And that's another thing a general always has to watch out for. What places to cross through. You want to cross through high elevated places with your back to the sun, and then stay away from those low, dark, marshy swamp areas.
Yep, exactly. And Vlad went with another method. So he put back the disguise. He's dressed like an Ottoman soldier again. And he literally walks into the enemy camp as Vlad the Impaler. And they didn't know. This is crazy. So he walks into the enemy camp dressed as a soldier, and he's trying to seek out where Mehmed's tent is. And he finds it. He's like, okay, I know where to attack next time. Next night, let's get back on the cavalry, get back on horseback, and invade, get to the tent of Mehmed, kill him, the army will crumble, we'll win this. He attacks it, and Mehmed's not even there. So another failed invasion of the enemy camp from Vlad the Impaler, and eventually he retreats all the way back to Transylvania. And Vlad, they say, lost about 5,000 of his 30,000 army, and Mehmed lost about 15,000 of his 150,000 army. Running back to Transylvania is also going to allow Mehmed to walk into Wallachia. So that's the nightmarish, infamous scene of Vlad the Impaler, where Mehmed walks into what he says was a forest of dead bodies on stakes, 20,000 people impaled in a gruesome scene that was, beyond brutal. But interesting enough, Mehmed had a very interesting thought about it. He, of course, was upset at it. He didn't want to see his own people, his even women and children on stakes. And it proved to him how much of a monster Vlad actually was. But he thought, it's interesting to me how so many people follow Vlad the Impaler, knowing who he is. That's what went to his head. He was amazed by the leadership, in a sense, and he actually gave Vlad a bit of respect in that way. A lot of people wouldn't do the same way. It showed Mehmed's different mentality.
Yeah, he had almost like a respect aspect to it.
Yeah, he saw past the forest of bodies, and he's like, man, what would possess people to help a guy like this or support him? He has to have something about himself that's commendable, or at least respectful, at the very least.
Yeah, he's reading between the lines.
Yep.
How is he winning? How is this monster winning the hearts of the people?
Yeah, it's very interesting. And at the time, Stephen the Great goes to invade a garrison, right? So he's on the attack, and Vlad learns about it. Vlad wants to help his friend, and apparently his cousin, I believe. And he leaves Transylvania. By this time, Mehmed left. Mehmed's done attacking. He goes back home. I think he went back to Constantinople. And, Vlad leaves Transylvania, goes to help Stephen the Great. And that was a bit of a mistake. So Stephen gets injured pretty early in his battle in that siege on that garrison. He gets hit by an artillery on the foot. He retreats while Vlad is on his way there. And now Vlad's brother, Radu, the one he got captured with in the beginning, he comes to Wallachia. And he's kind of a high up there in the Ottoman Empire. And people theorize as to why he was. And according to a Greek historian, his name was Lanikos, very difficult last name that's 12 letters, Chakokandilis. According to him, the Greek historian, Radu was given the nickname Radu the Beautiful because he was one of Mehmed's lovers. This is the reason as to why people believe that he was so high up in the rankings as well. Right? Him and Mehmed had a thing. They also invaded Constantinople together, and he was very close with Mehmed the whole time. So he was allowed to lead armies. Radu led an army into Wallachia, but he didn't initially attack. He didn't initially try to go after Vlad. Vlad learned about this. He heard about the messages that Radu sent throughout the country, warning his fellow Wallachians that Mehmed will come back. So Vlad returned, and he actually fought against his brother. Right? He's the one that fought against his brother, won 2 battles against him. He actually was beating his brother, but interesting enough, his men in his country were still going to Radu's side. They were defecting. They were betraying Vlad the Impaler, even though he was winning the battles against his brother. And I think it had to do with those messages. They actually believed, if Mehmed comes back, we're done for.
And the interesting thing about this was we had mentioned, and I believe it was I don't remember, it might have been the Alexander podcast, or I don't remember, but we mentioned Pyrrhic victory.
Okay.
So what happened here was his campaign. So if we go back for a second, for the Turkish campaign in Wallachia, remember the whole scorched earth, the disease and everything like that. So what happened was when Vlad's poisoning all the waters and the wells, and he's burning all the grains and everything down, what Vlad doesn't realize what he's doing, he's burning his own people's supply down. So what that did was now politically that made Vlad unfavorable to the Wallachian people. So what happens now, Radu, now we got to look at now the history of both of these guys. Radu, he's not a warrior.
No.
Vlad, he was trained as a young boy as a knight. to be a knight. He was trained, and that's how he actually eventually won the Wallachian throne, was through a one-on-one duel. And Radu is the opposite. He's a politician. Radu is, he knows how to talk to the people. He's got the gift of the gab. He knows how to talk. And now remember the people in Romania at the time, Wallachia, are in a desperate situation. They're hungry, they're starving, there's people that are sick, they have no food, the water's poisoned. They need a hero. Anybody that can sound or look good, Radu, of course, he has the gift of the gab, and they say, we like this guy.
And also remember, he is one of them, right? He is a Wallachian.
He's the same thing as them. Yep.
And the people probably at the time, they believe, maybe a country under Mehmed is not so bad, right? Maybe we'll be treated better than what Vlad is treating us like, because he's again destroying our own crops. He's poisoning our waters. He's killing our own people. Anybody who opposes him, he impales them. Like this is the reign of a monster. And maybe Radu is the way to go. Maybe Radu can be our leader, and maybe Mehmed could come here and fix things up.
And that's the interesting thing. So like what we said before was what I had mentioned in the last podcast: an army marches on its stomach.
Yeah.
Well, so do the people. Without food, without water, you're not going to be a favorite to the people.
And guess who were the first people? Some of the first people to betray Vlad, the Saxons, right? They really did not like each other.
Yeah.
They did not trust Vlad at all. And Vlad was losing a lot of support. He had to flee. He left and sought help from Hungary. But the king refused, to fight against the Ottomans. Again, the king there is not the same guy as Can Hunyadi. Can Hunyadi probably would have helped Vlad. Any effort against the Ottomans, he would have taken it. The new king, nah. He's not going to help him in that way. But during negotiations, the king of Hungary orders Vlad to be captured and imprisoned. So he goes to Hungary to ask for help. They imprison him. That's crazy. And the reasons are even crazier. They actually didn't have a legitimate reason to imprison him. They charged him on false accusations, or what became false accusations. So what happened here was the king of Hungary wrote a letter to the Pope for the reasoning as to why he just imprisoned Vlad the Impaler. They told the Pope that they found letters that Vlad wrote to the Ottomans that he will join them and invade Hungary if they do so, right? All they have to do is give his throne back to him, give him his kingdom, and in doing so, he would help them invade Hungary, which is a big country of resistance at the time. The Pope actually later found out this was all a lie. The letters that they found that Vlad wrote were forged, and they say it was by the Saxons.
See that even back in the day, they were writing bad press about people.
Yep. He actually never said this. They would have to know Vlad's character. He would never have done that, right? He never would have joined the Ottomans and invade Hungary at the time.
Yeah, basically, like, if you want to make it simple, it was the fake news of back in the day.
Yeah, the fake news back then. And Vlad was imprisoned in the city of Belgrade for 14 years. So if you ever wondered, how did Vlad last so long without, dying in battle or something? Most of that was in prison.
And this is what I mean by he won a Pyrrhic victory.
Yeah.
He beat the Ottomans in battle.
In that battle.
But he lost Wallachia.
Yep.
So at what cost was his victory?
You have to be a good leader. That's what this shows. You have to know how to lead the people the correct way, not just be as brutal as you can to the enemy to prove your psychological, part of this war.
Right.
And, it bit him back. He was beating his brother and he lost the whole thing. And during imprisonment, there are stories about him. They said like he was impaling rats on small stakes and stuff like that. And not only that, there were books being written about and poems being written about Vlad the Impaler. They would say that even Frederick III, I believe that's his name, the Holy Roman Emperor.
Yep.
They were writing books and poems to him about Vlad the Impaler, how he impaled 2 monks and said that he would do it to send them to heaven. And then he impaled their donkey so the donkey can join them. He at one time they wrote to him that he nailed these turbans to these Turks that came to pay him respects.
Yeah, the Turkish envoys. Yeah. And he told them, he said, take off your turbans as a sign of respect. And, basically when you enter a royal court, you take off any headwear.
Yeah.
And the Turks said, well, we don't do that. Our headwear is different than that of Westerners. So what he said, okay, so you don't want to take it off? We'll make sure it never comes off. So he nailed it to their head. He nailed it
to their head. It's just crazy. And, all these stories are starting to spread around in Europe. I mean, even the Holy Roman Emperor, probably the most powerful man in Europe at the time, is hearing about this. And this probably was a reason as to why people later thought that he became a monster, vampire, whatever it is. Maybe it had something to do with it. Who knows? But again, so as Jack said earlier, making friends with Stephen the Great was very important because now Stephen the Great comes back and he helps him get out of prison. So Stephen the Great asked for Vlad's release as he needed Vlad to take back the throne because his conflicts with the new Ottoman-ruled Wallachia is in turmoil. Hungary agreed only if Vlad converted to Catholicism, which he did. And then Vlad started to help Stephen the Great in various battles and even forced the Ottoman to abandon a siege in Moldavia at one point. Not too much documents as to like what happened in these battles. Just, he won this one, won that one. He was helping Stephen the Great a lot. And of course, his impaling ways came back, impaling his enemies, as always. And Stephen the Great helped Vlad invade Wallachia, where they pushed out the king and reclaimed the throne for Vlad. This is now the third time Vlad became king, or the leader of Wallachia.
Yeah, he regained his throne back, and that's why I say Stephen the Great, that was the best move he made, was building a relationship with them.
If he never did, he would have still been in prison. But here's the crazy part. 1 month later, after he takes it back, he dies. 1 month. So what happens here is Vlad and his 2,000 soldiers were ambushed by 4,000 Turkish soldiers or Ottoman soldiers. Vlad was killed in this little skirmish. It is stated by multiple historians, even some that spoke to Vlad's family after this, that Vlad was actually killed by his own men by mistake.
Yeah, because he had that habit of dressing up as a Turk. And
he
so
dressed like an Ottoman soldier, and they killed him.
And they couldn't tell the difference.
They couldn't tell the difference. That's a really good disguise. Yet his own men accidentally killed him in battle. And isn't it crazy how many things that Vlad did tactically that just went against him?
They say if a sword hits you from the back,
yeah,
you did something wrong.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. And that could be even not only from the enemy hitting your back, but your own allies.
Yeah, and that's usually what it's referred to as your own people,
Exactly.
your own kind, your own allies, friends.
Yep, exactly. And when Vlad died, it says that the Ottomans cut Vlad's body into pieces, brought his head to Mehmed, and Mehmed had his head placed on a high stake in Constantinople so everyone can see when they came into the city. He was very proud or, relieved that they got rid of this monster. And they had to deal with Stephen the Great after. As Janhanyani died, Jesh Kastrioti died at the time. Now Vlad's dead. Stephen the Great is the last champion of Christ. We're going to be talking about him in the next episode. And before we end this episode, we got some questions. We got 6 questions on Patreon. For anybody that wants to ask us any questions, it could be anything. Make sure to go to Patreon. It'll be in the link in the comments and the description below. You guys can ask them there. So first question we got from Mama San. So he says, not quite a question, but could you guys do some of the more ruthless leaders like Ivan the Terrible, Vlad the Impaler, as we just did? He read our minds here. I don't know if they were brutal or not. Just think they are because of their names. Yeah. As you know now, Vlad was extremely brutal, like beyond brutal. Historians would even, some of the historians at the time even compared them to Caligula and Nero, who were probably the most brutal people in history, right?
Yeah, I mean, Ivan the Terrible, is definitely up there.
Yeah.
That man was insane.
He changed. Was he the one that changed? Or no, it was someone else?
No, that was another. You're probably thinking of Ivan the Great. Maybe.
Ivan the Great, I'm thinking of, sorry.
Ivan the Terrible used to inhale mercury because he thought it would give him superpowers. And it was like, whoa.
Did that kill him?
No, but it made him very sick. It made him mentally very sick.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so Ivan the Terrible, yeah, very brutal guy as well. Vlad the Impaler, as you know now, was crazy.
Tamerlane's another one too.
Yeah, Tamerlane, yep. Oh, his methods of like execution showing power, it was menacing. Dong Zhuo, as we talked about in that Lubu episode, him as well.
First emperor of China, another terrible one.
Yeah, the Qin Shi Huangdi. Yeah, so thank you for the question. We're going to the next one. Isaac J. Can you do a segment on the great philosophers of the Enlightenment era? Oh, yeah, we could probably talk about that. I don't know if we'll make like their own episodes, but we probably will. Maybe we just like bunch them in together.
Yeah,
a bunch of philosophers.
There's you have obviously one of the most famous ones, Voltaire, of course. Yeah. He has very famous quotes everybody knows about.
Yeah,
so, we could probably.
We'll probably get into that. And then we'll go to Miracle Man. I would like to see what happened around the Ottoman Empire and how they almost conquered modern Europe around 1500s to 1600s. Yeah, so this is kind of leading into that. Like around this time with Vlad the Impaler, again, they're very powerful and they're just on their way up into their peak, right? And what happened? So why couldn't they conquer all of Europe?
So what happened here was at the end of the European conquest basically stops at the end of the 1500s. So like after the defeat of the Spanish Armada and all that, what happened was Spain and Portugal by this time, and even France and even England, became colonial powers. This is where the colonial empire started.
Yeah.
So Spain and Portugal had control of the waters on the Indian Ocean. So they were at the back door of the Ottomans. So the Ottomans were surrounded. Yeah. The Ottomans didn't realize, but the Ottomans had to be careful. So what it was all the other European powers built up so much power that the Ottomans couldn't really make a move without getting attacked.
Oh, okay. That's
So that really sapped their strength. They cut off supplies. They couldn't really move.
And how long did it take for the decline to happen? The Ottomans.
The Ottoman decline started in the halfway point of the 1600s.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
And then what happened was they were always known from then on out all the way till 1922 when they completely fell. They were known as the sick man of Europe because they were weak.
Yeah.
At that point.
I mean, the empire lasted, what?
Yeah, 622 years.
It's
Yeah.
crazy. That's such a long time. And then, so thank you for the question. We'll go to Logan. I have to ask, what is your favorite Total War game? Also, what got you into history? For me, it was games like Total War and movies like Troy and Gladiator. I actually never played a Total War game. I've heard of them. Never got into it. I played Age of Empires and stuff like that, the old Dynasty Warriors games, and some like the niche titles. What got me into history? It was always, for me, it was always kind of a thing, and in the family, people would talk about history. And as well, I did play some of these games and stuff like that got me into it as a kid. I always was just interested, like from the very beginning. What about you?
Yeah, I never played Total War, but for what got me into history, I would say for sure the old Dynasty Warriors games.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
If I hadn't played those, I wouldn't care about history at all.
Yeah, man. That's actually interesting. Just one game gets you into all of this that we're talking about now.
Yeah, I guess it's the fantasy element. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I view history in like a different. I think the best way to view history, just for enjoyment or entertainment, is kind of in like a story kind of sense, right?
Yeah.
Of course, it's very real. A lot of it's real. The further back you go, the more you could think of it as like a story. Like the more modern it comes, more modern it is, it's harder to look at it that way because it feels more real. But it's always been real, so we have to always remember that stuff. But just for your enjoyment, you kind of look at it how you want to, in a sense. Unless you become a leader, don't repeat those mistakes. So interesting question. Then we're gonna go to Max. With all the great generals, conquerors, warriors there has been in history, it had me thinking of all the attributes one must need to become that. So I was thinking, if you can only name one person from history for each of these attributes, who would you choose? Okay, so we got a few here. We got leadership. If you can name one leader, just comes to your mind.
Just for leadership?
Yeah, just leadership. I would probably say, I think Baldwin the Fourth, honestly, for me. For what little he had and what he had to work against, I thought, a great leader could do what he was. Only a great leader can accomplish what he accomplished, in my opinion, personal opinion.
I would throw Genghis Khan.
Genghis Khan?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. He probably checks all these boxes.
Probably.
And then adaptability. Adapting in like a battle, I guess.
Hannibal, hands down.
100%.
Hannibal, hands down.
Battlefield strategy. I would say Hannibal, but Battlefield, someone else. Subutai, I would probably pick.
If you wanted tactics, if he's looking at more that way.
Yeah, tactics.
You can't go wrong with Hannibal.
Hannibal is the best. Just to change it up, I'll say Subutai. Or you could say even Napoleon.
You could definitely Napoleon, yeah.
Bravery.
Who
was just brave? Who went at it?
Wow, I mean, they were.
There's a lot.
We've already covered a lot that were brave, but I'll tell you what, they didn't call Richard the Lionheart for no reason.
Exactly. I will pick Spartacus.
Spartacus, yeah, very brave.
It's very brave. From slave to, and what's it called? What do they call that? Public enemy. Discipline.
This is a good one.
Who was disciplined? Huh.
Tamerlane.
You think Tamerlane? Okay.
His men loved him no matter what happened to them. No matter what happened to him or them, no matter what happened, they loved him.
That is actually very true.
Tamerlane, the discipline he had in his army is insane. No, yeah, I know there's the Knights and the Spartans and all these other guys.
Yeah.
But if you really look at the generals, Tamerlane.
Okay.
That's what I would go with personally.
Yeah. I'd probably pick Tamerlane as well. Intelligence.
Ooh, it's a good one. Intelligence.
You can always go Sun Tzu.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with that.
Yeah, Sun Tzu is a great one. I mean, he pretty much wrote the book of how to go to war.
Yeah, I mean, he literally predicted the outcome of every war after him.
Yeah, so I don't think there's a better name than probably Sun Tzu. Skill proficiency. So I'm guessing this is as a warrior.
Well, if he means it as a warrior, as a fighter.
Yeah.
Musashi.
Musashi's the best. Let me think. You could also go with, Musashi's the best. I think I would go with as well. Political skills. Julius Caesar.
Yeah, for sure. Julius Caesar. He was a monster on the court.
Yeah, insane. Persistence. Never stop. I would pick, my opinion, I'd pick George Washington.
Persistence. That's a very good one. I would say Alexander.
Alexander the Great?
Yeah, I would say Alexander the Great.
Interesting. And also, the amount of knowledge you two have of history is amazing. It bounces off each other perfectly. Keep up the great work. Thank you, man. Really, very interesting question. I like this one a lot.
That was a good question, yeah.
Yeah. Then we go to Frace, the final question. I look forward to these history podcasts more than the MMA ones now, so keep up the great work, guys. Thank you so much, man. My question is, what were some of the most notable upsets in military history, and how were the leaders able to achieve them? Upsets. So I'm guessing this like against the odds.
Oh yeah, the Battle of Marathon.
Yeah.
No problem. The guy, when the Greeks had defeated the Persians, the man who ran 26 miles and then yelled Nike, which means victory in Greek, and he died right after that.
Oh, okay.
That was a huge upset.
Because Nike was one of their gods as well.
Yeah, and you look at Battle of Marathon, the Persians were way richer and had a much bigger army than the Greeks, and the Greeks had city-states.
Yeah.
And the Persian was a monstrous empire, even richer than the Roman Empire at its peak.
Yep. I'm a little bit biased, but regardless of my bias, I have to go Jesh Kastrioti at the Siege of Gruya in 1450.
Yeah.
8,000, I think it was 8,000 of him versus 100,000 Ottoman, which we'll talk about in that episode. One of the greatest upsets in human military history, where he was able to, it was a siege against one of his garrisons, his castles, and with 4,000 he had inside the garrison, 4,000 outside of it, and they were able to defend enough inside where at nighttime, Jesh Kastrioti and his 4,000 cavalry would come out and invade the enemy camps and all that stuff, destroying them. This is actually where Murad II died from. I believe it was 20,000 Ottoman died in the battle, and like 2,000 Albanians. It was one of the greatest victories ever, and that's, I'm very excited once I get into that one, because there's so many stuff that people just don't know about how great of a warrior and leader Jesh Kastrioti was.
Very underrated.
Oh my gosh, it's crazy. I'm so surprised. I'm not surprised people don't know about him, but like what he was able to do, he should be known much more than he is.
I mean, took 25 battles undefeated.
25 battles for over 20 years against the most powerful empire in history. Most powerful in that time. In that time. But that's end of this podcast episode. We're going to be going to the Patreon part. We're going to be talking more about our opinions and all this with Vlad and the medieval era, the Ottoman Empire and everything like that. So if you guys want to catch us for more, go to the Patreon, link in the description below. You can also ask questions. We'll probably do some other stuff as well, maybe some other kind of content. But for now, we'll probably go another 30 minutes to, however long we want to go. So I'll see you guys there. Yeah, so I can't wait, dude. I can't wait for Stephen the Great's going to be next. Because this ties in with Vlad. Yeah. And I actually, before I read about Stephen the Great, I didn't know he was much younger than the others, or he came later. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about him, then we're going to go to John Hunyadi, then Jesh Kastrioti at the end, because those last two tie together. And Vlad is crazy, man. Vlad is so insane. I was hoping he wasn't as sadistic as, the stories say.
Yeah, Vlad is just, he's on a different level of, extreme. He's just a whole different level.
And I wish there was more about battles, like what he did.
Yeah, the details of the battles are very vague.
Very vague. I was looking so into it. I was trying to find all the sources I could. There was so little about battles. So little. Just the night attack of Targovishte was the main one that was even documented.
And the only thing I could find, I mean, I barely found anything either. And when I did, it was the one, obviously, that night raised on Targovishte. But then even the first time when he fought at Targovishte, the first time he took the throne, he challenged the Vladislav to a duel, and he killed him. And I was like, and that was it.
Yeah, that was it.
So it was like, that's all she wrote.
You know what's actually cool about Vlad? We first got to know more about him from Deadliest Warrior.
Yeah.
Remember that? That was a cool show. So in Deadliest Warrior, they showed like his weapons. He had the Killage sword. Very powerful sword. That was the Turkish used. Very good weaponry that he was using in the battlefield. He was a good warrior too. I mean, he was raised to be a great warrior.
Yeah, they trained him in knightmanship since he was a kid. I mean, he was a good fighter.
But it's funny because so many people don't know how great of a warrior and like what kind of leader he actually was. Most people just saw him, just some crazy person, right? No, I mean, he ruled Wallachia 3 times essentially. And I hope people come to know more that he was a real person. I still think there's more people that think he's not real than he was real.
Yeah, Vlad was definitely a very real person.
The actual book, Dracula, I think was created in England, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, in the 1800s.
In the 1800s. And it's very interesting.
It was myth inspired from a truth.
Yes, myth inspired from a truth. Back then, people probably did think he might have been a monster like that. But, the crazy stuff that he did. I don't know, see, with the stories, it's hard to know what's true. Like, him sitting at the table watching the people get tortured and killed. I don't know if that really happened. Drinking blood of people or eating in their blood.
And that came from the Saxons, a lot of that. They wrote that bad press, that fake news about him.
Didn't they also write the fake news about the Vikings?
Oh, yeah.
So, like, it's always been a common thing that Saxons used to do back then, even the monasteries, you know?
And they say Vlad politically was not capable. Well, actually, here's a fun fact about Vlad. You know the modern day capital of Romania, Bucharest?
Yeah.
He created that.
Well, he actually created the capital?
He created the city, the foundations to the city of modern day Bucharest.
Oh, and did you know he is their national hero?
Oh, is he really?
Yeah, Vlad is actually Romania's national hero. I learned that. And I'm like, wait. They must not believe any of the stories then. They must not believe he did anything, or what he did was just, right?
That, or they just don't, or they just look past it.
Yeah, they're like, all right, guys, we don't talk about that.
Yeah, he fought hard for us.
He fought hard for our country, which he did. Credit to that. In a very gruesome way, obviously. Super brutal guy that the other champions of Christ would never do. Right?
Yeah, they didn't take it that far.
They didn't take it that far. Now, Jananyadi and Jeshkashrioti did pillage the villages of Serbia, but
yeah, they weren't impaling people.
Yeah, they weren't
impaling people,
gouging and burning them alive and all that. Unless I read something weird about it, then that'll be.
And Vlad used to, he used to cut off to show, I guess, like to show that he was on the side of the Hungarians at the times. He would cut off the noses and the ears of the enemy and send it in big bags. So I'm saying, look, we're on the same team, and it's like, okay,
what is wrong with this guy?
It sounds like, because you don't hear this stuff today. Yeah. You don't hear of anything. When you hear about it, it's like it almost sounds fake.
Yeah.
But this was the reality of the world at one time.
Back then, it was a horrible way to live. Like, dude, during the medieval times in the 1500s, it was a horrible time to live, man. It was...
Especially in the Balkans, oh my God.
It was horrible. I mean, we're talking about countries that weren't even as developed as France and England. They weren't developed as some of these other countries. They were defending against the most powerful empire at the time. You had the bubonic plague. You had the... many sicknesses.
Yeah, the Black Death in 1347 that had wiped out 100 million Europeans.
I mean, it's crazy, man.
And just so like this is clear, because maybe somebody might be having this question somewhere down the road. The Ottomans, how they conquered through the Balkans was because the Balkans was a bunch of principalities.
Yeah, there
was no unified. The Byzantine Empire was on its way out. There was no really central Byzantine government at that point. It was very weak.
Yeah.
So even in Albania, for example, you had different principalities. In Romania, Hungary, and Serbia, you had different principalities. The Serbian Empire was somewhat crumbling.
Yeah.
So the Turks, what they did was they put all of these tribes and principalities against one another. They said, "Oh, this is your enemy. Okay, well, he said this about you. He did." And basically what I'm saying is what they divide and conquer.
Yep. Played into their egos, played into their pride.
And the Turks did this amongst the same ethnic group.
Yeah.
The people that one ethnic group, they would divide them against many different tribes. Yep. They would kill. They would fight each other. They get exhausted, and once they were exhausted, the Turks swept in and just took everything over.
Yeah, easily, way easy. It's an easier way for them to take whatever's left of the battles that happen between these factioning rulers.
Yeah, it's like if you're fighting somebody in the ring, and then you a 12-round fight, and then you have somebody fight that guy for 11 rounds, then you jump in fresh in the 12th round and fight him. It's like, well, that's what the Turks.
That's exactly. Yeah, that is what it is. You just let them tire themselves out, and then you come in for the finishing blow very easily. And they come in with numbers, man.
Oh my God!
The thing about the Ottoman Empire, why they had such an advantage, is they were just spitting out soldiers everywhere, like just nonstop. They had so many men. It was crazy. I don't know where they were getting them from.
Fielding 90 to 150,000 guys. That's just so everybody knows, that is not normal.
No.
To field that many people, you need to have a lot of money.
Especially in the medieval times.
Oh man, in those times you need to have even now you need to have a lot of money to field an army like that. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting because like the ancient times, they were able to field a lot of men for some weird reason.
Yeah.
But in the medieval times, like 100,000 was so unheard of. And I forgot, I think it was 200,000. Was it 200,000 Mehmed sat in Constantinople?
Yeah.
And he took the city of Constantinople. That's crazy.
And what's interesting too is like even the country the city that's next to Constantinople that Vlad was always called to do a meeting council that was called Edirne, Adrianople. That's what it used to be called. This was the famous city that Attila Hun had invaded.
Oh, okay.
So Vlad's got a history there too.
Yeah.
So you got some big names that went to Adrianople. You got Attila, Vlad. You got a lot of big names that have been there.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. I need to read more about, especially I want to read more about Mehmed. They did make that movie. I think it's a movie or a series. I wonder if that's accurate. Most of these are not accurate. Like we talk about the Baldwin movie.
Yeah, a lot of it's drama.
It does him so much injustice. Like he was way cooler in real life. But yeah, like so Vlad, I wonder. I wonder if they're ever gonna like come out with like the real stuff with him. I don't know if they have with, like, any shows or movies or books or.
I don't think so.
I wonder. That'd be much more interesting. Because the people at the time, dude, like I mentioned, earlier, people at the time, they literally viewed him as like their version of Nero and Caligula. If you know anything about Nero and Caligula, right? Like these guys make some of the worst leaders today look like nothing, or look like they're like saints, with some of the stuff they used to do, throwing people into the Colosseum to get eaten by lions, just regular people. Throw them in there, just do some crazy stuff. One of them, I think it was Nero. Was it Nero that killed his wife? Stomped her out, killed her. I think she was pregnant. Killed the baby too when she was pregnant. Then married a eunuch because he looked like her. And it's like, yeah, there's something off about this guy,
You know what the craziest thing is too is like you hear about these forms of these bad people and the tortures and the executions they committed. Like if, for example, like we mentioned before, like Tamerlane, right?
Yeah.
He would, the way he used to execute people. Alexander the Great did this sometimes too, but a little differently.
Yeah.
He 2 horses left and right, and a man would be his left arm and left leg would be tied to the left horse, right arm and right leg tied to the right horse. The horses would run, they would split apart. The man would literally rip in half.
Yeah.
And it was just, and then he would have people not chew, but he would have them eat wool, drink a bunch of water, and their stomach would explode. And it was just a horrible
How would he even figure that out?
People, it was just these things were very real, but very gruesome. I mean, they were very real, very gruesome too.
Who's the one that would spill the gold? Was it gold inside them?
Oh, molten?
Molten, yeah.
Yeah, Tamerlane did that.
Yeah.
He did that to, I believe, was it the Ottoman? Sultan Bayezid, the Thunderbolt Sultan, they called him. Hot molten down his ears, the eyes, mouth,
They do say that he was also a good leader.
Oh, and his men loved him.
Yeah.
His men, they loved him.
Which is crazy. It comes back to what Mehmed was saying about Vlad. He's like wondering how could people support and follow this guy. I guess Tamerlane, some of these crazy weirdos, they get a lot of following and they're able to lead them.
The interesting thing about these leaders is they understand the same thing. You have to instill a degree of fear.
Yeah.
You have to let them know I am not one to be played with. And these guys understood that. So by Vlad impaling, by Tamerlane annihilating entire populations, it's like, okay, don't mess with this guy.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's that. And same thing with Genghis Khan and these other guys. It's that same thing. It's you have to truly be respected, there has to be an element of fear.
Yeah, usually. But then there are rare circumstances where the people are in such a dire position, like George Washington.
Yeah.
There's no room to fear your leader in this sense, because George Washington is not someone to fear for his own people, or at least the people that he took the country or created the country with. But in that kind of circumstance, it's like we have an ultimate goal that we need to accomplish here, and with all our efforts, we coming from nothing, we're going to create this country and take out the tyranny. That kind of way. There's another reason to fight. But for guys like Conquerors is a different story. There is a level of fear that needs to be implemented. As
it goes back to way back 2,500 years ago. You look back to like Sun Tzu, for example.
Yeah.
King Hulu of Wu, the Wu state of Wu. He told him, can you turn these concubines of mine into fighters? He says, sure, I could. He goes, okay, let's see it happen. So he gives one concubine sword, another concubine the sword, and he tells them, I want you both to assemble as soldiers. They laugh. Sun Tzu says, okay. Maybe you didn't hear me, or maybe my orders weren't clear. You take one sword, you take one sword. Now I want you to assemble as soldiers. They laughed again. So now you've got to prove you're deadly serious.
Yeah.
So what does he do? He chops both their heads off. The King Hulu was like, oh no. He goes, why, you just killed my dearest concubines. Yeah. They didn't follow orders. My orders were given, and they were given clearly. Yeah. They didn't follow orders. Punishment is death.
Now that's a statement.
So it's again, and after he told the other girls, now I want all of you girls to assemble as soldiers.
Yeah.
They didn't think twice. They didn't miss a beat.
Yeah. And it's crazy. He had to take 2 lives to prove a point to thousands or, hundreds of thousands.
Unfortunately, some blood had to be spilled, unfortunately.
Yeah. And this is why, it's kind of weird to talk with certain people about this kind of stuff where, when it comes to leadership, there are acts that some of these people have to make sometimes that could come off as evil or cruel for a better good. You've seen this throughout all of history, right? There's been very very, very few amount of leaders that were just seen as good all the way through, right? Like for a long time, people thought Alexander the Great wasn't evil.
Yeah, they looked at this hero type of
Yeah, a hero
persona.
kind of guy. And no, he was not like that. He did evil stuff. He wiped out the male population of Gaza. You know, like, and he enslaved the women and children there at the garrison or whatever. And you know, he made an example of that guy, and he dragged him around the city. You know, there are some things that these guys would have to do, and the reason why we mentioned it back then, Alexander would do that is so no one can uprise against him. You know,
and just so nobody like
and conquering in general is just, you know, not a great thing.
Right. And just so nobody misunderstands, like when we talk about these things, we say it on behalf of that everybody understands the realities of war.
It's the reality, not justifying it, but it is reality.
These are this is why I personally always say that being a general of war is the hardest thing, because your morality and intelligence conflict.
Yeah, and sometimes you can't even think in a moral way at times, you know, depending on where you're at. You know, there are certain circumstances where morality's out the window and you just have to find a way to win and survive.
Yeah, and then like you had mentioned with Alexander, when he wiped out the whole population of Gaza there, the male population.
Yeah.
It's like you think to yourself, so somebody who doesn't understand history or war, even to the most basic points, like, why would he kill all the men?
Yeah.
Well, men they can enforce violence.
Exactly.
Women and children can't.
Yeah.
So if you kill the people who can enforce violence, nobody can stand against you.
Yep, exactly. That's the main reason he would do that. And not only him, there's been other leaders throughout history that did the same thing. Target the male population, enslave the women and children, because and also with enslaving the women and children, they can sell them for, you know, gain or some kind of economic gain.
And they can raise up the boys to be soldiers in their army, just like the Ottomans.
The Ottomans do it. They did it a lot. I mean, they told Vlad's father, "Give me 500 boys." You know, that's crazy. Can you imagine today? If, like, you know, the leader of, you know, I don't know, Bulgaria or something, is told by the Turkish leader, "Yo, give me 500 boys. You know, I'm gonna raise them." You know, crazy. There would be uprising in Europe. Not uprising, but people would be like talking about it in Europe, like, "Yo."
And what's crazy is, even at the time, people, you know, they would have their envoys, like men from ambassadors, basically, knock on your door and say, almost like the tax collector, and they'd say, "All right, where's your son?
Yeah,
we're taking him.
We're taking your son."
And again, there was no computer, no saying, "Hey, you got to turn your son." No, they knocked on your door. Your son is ours. Yeah. If you tried to fight back, you got killed. You could have been just with your, you know, like the mother was with the kid, like could have just been playing with them or just sitting there with them, you know, talking to them. And then all of a sudden you hear the knock at the door, and here comes the government official, the ambassador. He's like, "Yo, your son's coming with us right now, and you're not going to see them again for a long time." It's like, whoa. A lot of people had that fear. A lot of people like, "Oh, is the army coming?
Yeah, we
got to hide. Is the army coming?" And I'm sure a lot of families in those times did it. They would hide their young ones. Yeah. So, we don't have kids.
Yeah.
Or, you know, the kids they went off to their uncles or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. Like, you know, it happened with Jesh Kastrioti with Skanderbeg.
Yeah.
He was given up by his father to the Ottomans as like a paying homage in a way.
Yeah, it's just, paying homage, yeah.
And that became a horrible decision later.
It's funny because, you know what the crazy thing about all this is the Turks, you know, they had a lot of historical documents, but it's like when you look down history, everybody's making the same mistake as the guys before them. The Romans, the Ottomans, making the same mistakes the Romans did with the German general Arminius. They trained Arminius. They trained a German to go fight in Germany.
Yeah.
You really think it's going to work? So he went there, he unified the German tribes, and now he beat off the Roman Empire. The Germans were free.
Wow.
And now you're seeing it here with Skanderbeg and these other guys.
Yeah, Vlad.
You're training them, and here they go against the Turks.
Yeah, it was Spartacus, you know, as a gladiator.
Yeah, same thing, yeah.
He was a slave, dude. They made sure he was the lowest of the low at the time. He did become a celebrity because people mistaken. Gladiators, a lot of them were slaves, but they also became celebrities in a way.
They had a celebrity status because they were in the entertainment business.
Yes. Yeah, and Spartacus grew an army, you know, from there and attacked the entire empire. So, like, you know, they gotta be. It goes back way back, you know, way back in the day of when they started doing this, and all the way to like the 1500s, medieval times. I can't imagine they would do it in modern times, but who knows?
And then that's the thing. You know, it's crazy when you look back at the Colosseum. People used to watch a lot of the chariot racing.
Yeah.
Like, that's boring. Who would want to watch chariot
racing?
Yeah. Like chariot racing? Like,
who's going to race our little wooden wheels faster?
Just seeing a wagon dragged by a horse in a circle 100 times. It's like, okay, I'm bored now.
Yeah, it's their track and field back then. They did have the, in Greece, I think, they had the Olympics.
Yeah.
Even back then. They would have boxing. They would have the sprint. I forgot where they come up with the marathon.
That came from the Battle of Marathon.
Yes, yeah. The guy ran
26 miles.
26 miles to deliver news.
To deliver news that they beat the Persians, and he yelled Nike, and
Yes,
that was his last. They say that was the last bit of life he had in him. To yell Nike, which meant victory, and he passed out and died.
You're right, and you just mentioned that too earlier. I forgot. Yeah, I read about that back in college when I made like a. What's it called? I wrote a paper about track and field and the history of it, and where the marathon came from, all that stuff. It's actually very interesting. Yeah, but there were guys even back then, like boxers were celebrities at the time. You know, eventually they got gladiators in the Coliseum. And isn't that crazy how, like, look how brutal it was back then. They used to watch the Coliseum games like we watch, like, boxing or MMA or something today. Like,
yeah, and they would
bloodshed. Like,
yeah, one of their most famous, which is insane, of course, they would, during the times when Christians were around, in the early Christian period, they would throw them to lions.
Yeah.
And that was considered a spectacle.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Let's see the lion kill this guy. And they're all applaud and go crazy. Oh my gosh, it's insane.
Some people have a hard time watching, when you watch like boxing or MMA, you see like a bad cut on somebody's head, or you see a big swelling on their head, and it's like, oh man, that's nasty. But imagine just watching somebody get ripped apart by a lion.
By a lion in front of everybody. Like, and you have to be there. You can't watch that at home. You got to be there.
Yeah, you're physically right there watching it happen, flesh and blood.
Like, can you imagine just sitting there and you look at everybody? You're like, what's wrong with everybody? Like,
that's the thing. Did anybody just stop and think like this is completely twisted? Like, this is not normal.
We're literally watching this guy getting eaten alive by a lion. And we're cheering for it.
And I mean, that's insane. I don't know.
And I think it was, I mentioned before, I think it was Caligula or it was Nero that sent the entire first row into the Colosseum with the lion. It's like, whoa, these people were different. I think they got so used to the brutality of life. Like,
yeah, they just accepted it.
Yeah.
It's just like, this is what it is.
People would get killed for little reasons. Like, very small reasons. And it was allowed. I was watching this show called Shogun. Right. Actually, some of our viewers shared that show with me, and I started watching this show, Shogun.
It's a good show.
Yeah, and it's about the samurais, of course. And even back then, like what they portrayed, I don't know how accurate it is, their daily lives, how their lifestyles were, but like they treated in that show, they would treat life like it's nothing. Just give up life. You dishonor your family, you kill yourself. If you dishonor this, you kill yourself. If you do something wrong, you exile yourself. They would even ask the samurais back then would ask permission of their like lords for to commit seppuku and all that. It was crazy.
You know what the crazy thing also, samurai, there's a huge like myth around the samurai life, just the everyday life of a samurai. It was extremely hard.
Yeah.
Extremely difficult. Not just like physically speaking, but just even like just living wise. Like if you, for example, if you were like at a bar, right, or what they considered a bar back then, and you accidentally clashed sword cases with another warrior, samurai, if neither one of you apologized, you had to fight to the death.
Yeah.
Imagine that. By
accident, just whoops.
That's like we say the Wild West over here. But that's like the Wild East.
Yeah.
That's, that's a whole new level.
Yeah. Even by accident, it'd be like, oh, sorry, man. Oh, no, you don't say sorry. You hit him. You're too prideful to say sorry. You're both samurais.
You got to duke it out to the death.
Yep. Now we got to fight to the death. I just came here to get a drink. Now I'm going to try to kill this guy really quick.
Yeah. Who knows where, guy A was coming from. Guy B says like, oh, hey, what are you doing? Like,
yeah, it's crazy. And not only that, I think, I don't know if you read about this. The Yakuza in Japan, apparently they say they're the descendants of the samurai. I don't know how true that is, but it does bring into question, like, we look at samurais like they're they were honorable, but like these good or just people and all this stuff, but they were like kind of rugged in their own way. They were like more mean and all that stuff. They had to be in a sense.
You know what's interesting? In the 8th century, when the samurai started, the word samurai literally means to serve.
Yeah.
And to serve the people.
Yeah.
But of course, just like any organization, as it becomes wealthier and wealthier, there's a higher chance of corruption.
Yep.
And that's exactly what happened with them. Just like any other organization in any part of the world and any part of history.
Yeah.
Same thing happened to them. They became corrupt. They abused their power at some point, and then...
Yeah, the shoguns, the daimyos as well, with their samurai. They were supposed to serve the people, but they instead served, of course, the leaders, because the leaders will give them power, the leaders will give them money and women and all that stuff, and it just corrupted.
Just like any good organization, they had a very, very humble start. They had a very good meaning behind it, but then, of course, it got skewed.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's the money, it's the resources, the materials, the women, all that stuff. That's what usually corrupts men throughout all of history, And we can even talk about, isn't it crazy when you read about Cleopatra?
Yeah.
How she was able to get so much power.
Yeah,
and the people she tricked, the people that she had wrapped around her fingers, Julius Caesar.
Oh,
Mark Antony.
The most powerful figures of that time.
Yeah, the most powerful men in the world. We're talking about Julius Caesar.
That till this day, that name's not forgotten. It's just...
And he was wrapped around Cleopatra's finger like crazy, man. That is so insane. They say that he had a kid with her.
Yeah, it's just, they say a woman's intuition is very strong.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, even the women did it back then. They weren't that many warriors, right?
No.
But they had their own ways of gaining power.
Yeah, they had a much more feminine approach.
Yeah, and it was a lot more deceitful for the men at the time. A lot of the men did not see through it. And, many times women would be able to get into power under them and the men really wouldn't understand it in that way. It took a lot of time for people to finally start to understand that sort of power dynamic.
Right.
And we did have like Joan of Arc, as you mentioned earlier. She didn't last long, but did she only fight in that one battle?
I think so, yeah. Battle of Orleans, and then she got burned after.
Burnt to the stake.
18 years old, I think, if I'm not wrong. She only lived up to 18 years
It was her
old.
own people that burned her?
No, the English.
Oh, the English burned her. I forgot. Yes, she was French. And she led the army, which is crazy. Maybe we do that one day. We'll see. But that would be such a short episode.
Yeah, it would probably be 20 minutes.
Sadly, yeah. It would be such a short episode. I thought Vlad wasn't too long. Vlad, even though when you look at his history, he was alive for a very long time, and ruled 3 different times. But then when you realize he was in prison for 14 of those years, it's like, oh, okay. He really wasn't on the battlefield as much as we thought. Unlike Can Hunyadi, Can Hunyadi was a menace to the Ottoman Empire. I feel bad for that guy in his own cause, because it's like he tried so hard.
Yeah, for him, you really feel for him.
Yeah.
It's like, the guy tried really hard.
He tried so hard, dude, against the strongest army. He tried to gather all these allies. He led the crusade. Like, he tried to work with George Castrioti. George Castrioti got backstabbed. He tried to work with Vlad the Impaler. Vlad became a monster, twisted in the head. It was hard for him.
And he's working with so many different extreme personalities.
Yeah.
And it's like, and again, like, like I'd mentioned before in the podcast, like who do you trust?
Yeah.
That's the problem. It was the Balkans in this specific time. There was so many trust issues.
Yeah.
And you can see it too. You look into the history of all these different kingdoms in the Balkans, and it's like, well, these guys all have trust issues.
Yeah.
And that's
even amongst their own countries and neighboring countries, allies, everything.
You don't have a strong, unit or a bond with anybody if there's no trust.
Yeah, I mean, with Vladislav, right?
Yep,
Can Hunyadi put that guy into power in Wallachia, and he betrayed him.
He ended up working with the Turks.
That's crazy, and he thought this would be the guy that wouldn't do it.
Yep, and that's it's difficult. It's a very hard it's a very hard position to be in.
Yeah, because I mean, you got to think also, like, try to put yourself into the shoes of the people that defected, right? You're fighting against the Ottoman Empire. They're only growing, right? They took Constantinople. The takeover of Constantinople was a very, very big deal back in those times. They took it, and they took it with 200,000 men in an army. That is a number that most of these other countries cannot gather, right? It's like, maybe life will be easier, if we just give up to the Ottomans, in that sort of mentality.
You know what the crazy thing about this is, and when we mentioned, like, so far we've mentioned quite a bit of people.
Yeah.
So you might, Hannibal, Alexander, and then all these other guys we've mentioned. It's important to understand the what's going on, like, because remember, these people, they were human beings just like we are.
Yeah.
So and again, Sun Tzu says it in The Art of War. If you don't, and a lot of people, they made truces with a lot of people that they didn't have an official pact with.
Yeah.
That there was no official handshake or no official contract. And Sun Tzu says, if there's no official agreement and handshake or written contract or something official, you will 100% at some point you will get backstabbed.
Yeah.
So, and this is why it's important to know these things to history. Yeah, you know the people, you know the facts, but you have to understand, because you can apply all of this to your daily life.
Yeah. And this is why when we talk about Khalid, why it was so impressive that no one backstabbed him. It's such an impressive thing, because when we talk about Vlad, and we're going to be talking about Stephen the Great, we're going to be talking about John Hunyadi, Jesh Castrioti, and many more in the future, all these guys got backstabbed. All of them. Khalid didn't, which is wild. The only people he got backstabbed from, it wasn't he that got backstabbed. It was after Muhammad died, and there was like the struggle for power, but Khalid wasn't the leader, so no one really backstabbed him. When he was leading the armies into the Persian Empire, into the Byzantine Empire, nobody, like, they were with him the whole way through, right? So that's such an impressive thing. That's why I mentioned it. And when we talk about more warriors and leaders, you're going to see how impressive that actually becomes. Because all these guys get backstabbed, every single one.
And also the also scary element to knowing who's going to who you can trust.
Yeah,
is you have to put yourself and that person or group through bad times.
Yep.
That's the scary part. That means you have to be in a situation where you have a lot to lose.
Yeah.
Hannibal, for example, when he crossed the Alps, nobody wants to cross the Alps on foot. No, I don't care what anybody says. In all of human history, that was one of the hardest endeavors in human history.
Yeah.
So many men were lost. He lost half his army.
Yes.
And not a single man mutinied against him. You can't, what I'm saying is you can't even fathom how much loyalty that is. I mean, how many people nowadays would, if their general said, we're going to go march through the Alps, I don't care what you think or say about it.
Most people wouldn't even follow their dad and mom through the Alps these days, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, they wouldn't even follow their own family members, let alone some random guy that calls himself a general.
Yeah, they trusted him. And it also speaks to his leadership,
But again, like I said, you have to, in order to know who's with you, ride and die, you gotta put them and yourself through bad times.
Yeah,
it's scary, but that's the way to do it.
It's unfortunate, yeah. But that's what do they say? What's the saying? Hard times make good men.
Yeah. Hard times make strong men. Yeah.
Yeah. There's like a whole saying. I forgot what it was. Hard times make strong men. Strong men make something.
Make soft times. Soft times make very weak men.
Yes. You got it. Yep, that's what it is.
And that's what it comes down to. Is it's a cycle.
Yeah. So that'll be the end of the episode, guys. I don't want to go too long. It's an hour and 40 minutes. So thank you so much, guys, and I'll see you in the next episode, which is going to be Stephen the Great. And again, for that one, if you guys want to ask questions, keep coming to the Patreon. So thank you.